The sun was high over my uncle's backyard, the kind of harsh summer light that made everything feel exposed. Smoke from the grill drifted through the air, thick with the smell of charcoal and marinated meat. Laughter burst out in loud waves, mixing with the clatter of plates and bottles. Family barbecues were always like this, noisy, crowded, and exhausting. I had learned long ago to move quietly through them, to take up as little space as possible. I had just finished fixing myself a plate when I heard my father's voice cut through the noise, sharp and confident. "She'll never own anything," he said, gesturing openly in my direction with the tongs in his hand. 28 years old, still renting, no husband, no house, just barely getting by. Uncle Ray laughed like it was a punchline. Aunt Carol shook her head, her mouth twisted into a look of fake sympathy. I stopped mid-step, my fingers tightening around the edge of my plate. For a moment, I couldn't move. The words landed heavier than I expected, even though I'd heard versions of them my entire life. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in less than 2 weeks, I would be signing off on the payments that kept his business running. My name is Sophia. I'm 28 years old, and I grew up in a working-class family where value was measured in sweat, calloused hands, and things you could point to and say, "I built that." My dad ran a small contracting business. He poured his life into it. Long hours, early mornings, aching joints. To him, that was real work. Anything else was just talk. When I told him I wanted to go to college, his reaction wasn't pride, it was disbelief. "You're going to sit in an office while other people do the real work?" he asked, half laughing, half irritated. I was the first in my family to go to college. I studied business management, took out loans, worked part-time jobs, and learned very quickly that independence didn't come with applause. I graduated with debt and a resume full of entry-level positions. No one celebrated that. No one cared. I rented a small apartment. I drove an old car that rattled when it started. I lived carefully, quietly, always thinking 3 steps ahead. To my dad, that meant I had failed. In his eyes, if you didn't own property, if you didn't work with your hands, if you didn't look successful, you weren't. Back at the barbecue, he kept going. "I told her to come work with me," he said to anyone who would listen, "learn a real trade, but she thought she was too good for that." Someone murmured agreement, someone else laughed. A cousin chimed in loud and cheerful. "Soph, when are you finally going to stop renting? It's like throwing money away." "I'm fine," I said quietly, forcing my voice to stay steady. That's what she always says. Meanwhile, I built everything I have with my own hands. That's stability. Aunt Carol tried to sound kind. "Maybe you should ask your dad for a job, sweetheart. At least you'd have security." I set my plate down. I wasn't hungry anymore. What I didn't say was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd been promoted to Senior Director of Vendor Operations at a national facilities management company. I didn't mention that I oversaw contractor relationships, budgets, compliance, and renewals. I didn't explain that my job wasn't flashy, but it carried real authority. And I definitely didn't tell them that my company had just signed a major multi-year subcontract with my father's business. I left the barbecue early, claiming I had work to finish. Sitting alone in my car, I stared at the steering wheel and let the embarrassment wash over me. Years of being dismissed, minimized, spoken about like I wasn't even there, it all came rushing back. My phone buzzed. An email notification. I opened it without thinking. The subject line read, "Vendor onboarding, signatures required." I scrolled through the list of contractors and froze when I saw the name. My father's company. A week later, the family group chat lit up. My dad announced he'd landed a massive corporate contract. Congratulations poured in from every direction. "This is what hard work looks like. So proud of you. That's real success." I read every message in silence. No one asked about my job. No one asked how I was doing. I had always been invisible unless I was being criticized. A few days after that, I ran into my dad at a cafe. He was animated, talking loudly about the new project, already spending money he hadn't earned yet. When I mentioned, casually, that I'd been promoted, he barely looked up. "Promoted to what?" he asked. "Senior Director," I said. Scoff, fancy title. Still working for someone else, though. Then, a few days later, he called me. "Soph, I need a favor." He needed money for equipment deposit, just temporary. Family helps family, right? The guilt was familiar, automatic, but something inside me had shifted. "I'll think about it," I said. His tone hardened. "Forget it. I'll figure it out myself." I hung up and sat there feeling strangely calm. For the first time, I didn't feel small. What he didn't know was that I wasn't just promoted. I had final approval authority over contractor payments and renewals. I didn't hire his company, but I did oversee its performance. I was the one who signed off on invoices. I was the one who decided whether contracts continued. The night before the kickoff meeting, my mentor stopped by. When I told her one of the contractors was my dad, she raised an eyebrow. "He doesn't know who you are here, does he?" I shook my head. She smiled slightly. "You earned your seat at that table. Don't forget that." The next morning, I arrived early and took my place at the head of the conference table. When my dad walked in, confident and smiling, he didn't recognize me at first. Then our eyes met. The confusion on his face was instant. When my supervisor introduced me as the senior director overseeing the contract, the room went silent. I conducted the meeting calmly, professionally, explaining expectations, timelines, and payment approvals. When I mentioned that invoices would come directly to me, my dad went pale. For the first time in my life, he listened. After the meeting, he left without a word. Days later, my phone rang. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. I didn't rush to forgive him, but I listened. What changed that day wasn't just how my family saw me, it was how I saw myself. I realized I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to own a house to own my worth. I didn't need to explain my success to make it real. Sometimes the loudest power is quiet, and sometimes the people who underestimate you are the last ones to realize how far you've already gone.